Creole Music Festival back on in Dominica this year. So again, the official launch of the World Creole Music Festival was just announced a couple of hours ago. And you may know that the festival has been canceled for the last 2 years due to COVID. So great news indeed. But as we continue to welcome these economic opportunities for our country, it begs the question of whether or not our banking system in Dominica and the Caribbean region are robust enough for our current and future personal and business needs. So that is what we will be discussing this evening as we come on in for another episode of Roots Connections. This is episode number 30 for today, August 10th, 2022. And I am your host, Simone Mathieu. If you're joining us on Facebook and YouTube Live, good evening to you. And if you are listening on Q95 and you're interested in joining the conversation on Facebook and YouTube Live, you can head on over to Q95 FM Radio as well as Push Past 10 on Facebook. And you can also join us on YouTube on Q95 FM radio. As always, we are grateful for Mr. G and the Q95 radio station for the opportunity to come together every second and fourth Wednesday to tap into the human resources of our Dominican experts at home and abroad as we continue to discuss topics of national importance. So I like to think of this program as the very first step in reversing the drain that Dominica and the Caribbean region have experienced for the last few decades. So we're tapping into our experts in Dominica as well as all our experts worldwide to be able to discuss topics of national importance, topics of regional importance, and what are the implications of the changes that we are seeing all over the world? Because I think we can all agree that just about every industry, just about every field, we're talking agriculture, we're talking education, money, banking, culture, entertainment, just about every field that we can think about, they're changing. So that is our goal. Our goal is to be able to tap into our experts as they help us to navigate these changes. And just as importantly, as they help us to see the benefits of these changes and how we can all gain financial and economic benefits from all the change that is going on around us. So today is no exception. We have another great 2 hours of programming for you this evening as we explore the topic which has implications for all of us, whether we live in Dominica or the diaspora. And especially, you know, if you're like me, who recently had a situation where an international wire transfer I've been doing for many, many years suddenly would no longer go through. So it begs the question of what is going on in our banks, what is going on with all the international banks withdrawing from Dominica and the Caribbean region, and should we be concerned? Should we be concerned with what is going on in our banking system? So let us say good evening to our panel. We have Dr. Thomson Fontaine, we have Mr. Louis Robinson, and we have Mr. Julius Corbett. So we say good evening to them as they unmute their mics and they introduce themselves and they kind of just give us an idea of how their experience and expertise relates to the banking industry. So Dr. Fontaine, I will start with you.
Hi, Simone. Good night. And to my good friend Julius Corbett and Miss Louis Robinson. It's certainly a pleasure to be on such a distinguished panel tonight to talk about banking issues. Of course, Thomson Fontaine. I'm not sure how I should introduce myself. If I should simply say Thomson Fontaine from the village of Granford and leave it at that, or
it's up to you.
In terms of my, if you like, my credentials on being able to speak to the issues, to banking issues, in fact, just today I received word that a paper I did on banking crises in 2006, whilst I was at the IMF, has just been quoted or referenced 5,300 times.
Wow.
I got my 5,300 mention um, after just about 16 years, which is remarkable in the field of in terms of just adding to the discussion, adding to the knowledge. And so I think I know a thing or two about banks. And having worked for some 13 years at the IMF in Washington, D.C., where one of the things we looked at very closely was the health of the banking system and being able to understand monetary matters and how that, all of that, or the interplay and the interaction. So I think, Simone, it's my pleasure to be on this program tonight to discuss those issues. Because even today, I received via Facebook or for some social media an announcement from the National Bank of Dominica
Yes.
indicating that they will no longer accept anybody can just now walk in from the street and exchange foreign exchange. You could do that without any questions asked. Now they say that you must have an account with the National Bank of Dominica to be able to make that transaction. So that's a new restriction that we see. We'll discuss later about why that is so and what is going on. But just to give by way of introduction, as I said, I'm delighted to be with a former manager of the National Bank and a former very high-ranking official as well of the National Bank of Dominica. So I'm sure they're better placed than me to talk about the National Bank. But certainly with my experience in banking and financial matters, I look forward to making some contribution tonight.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Fontaine. Mr. Robinson.
Good evening. Of course, I'm Louis Robinson from the little village of Marigot. I have spent over 35 years in the financial services sector, both as a regulator and a regulatee. In other words, I've worked with the state of New York and the state of Florida as a senior bank examiner. And then I worked in the banking sector with such industries like Banca Nazionale del Lavoro, which is Italy's largest commercial bank and the 25th largest bank in the world after they had to cough up 9 billion. I have worked as a compliance officer, chief financial officer, and as head of internal audit. So it gives me an insight that most other people may not have had in terms of both being as a regulator. So I go examine banks and see what their conditions are, whether they're doing prudent or imprudent banking practices. And as in compliance, when you examine banks, you look for whether they are complying with the latest was the AML's, BSAML, that is Banks Compliance Act, anti-money laundering, and these sorts of legislation, how they implement them, how the banks are used. And strangely enough, when we talk of the incidents that Simone mentioned, and also the one that Dr. Fontaine mentioned, it brings to mind the de-risking issue and how it affects the banking community, not only in Dominica, but in the Caribbean generally and throughout the world. But the interesting thing about the Caribbean experience is how they respond to the international or to the global financial community in terms of giving them guidance on the sorts of things they should do in their due diligence process. And so part of the problem that they experience, and Dominica in particular, don't seem to have any particular regulatory framework, no policy, no monetary policy per se by the government in particular. And there generally seem to be a lack of understanding of the role and the function of the National Bank of Dominica as a fully fledged independent commercial entity.
Yes, but Mr. Robinson, before we go into the details, and thank you for giving us a very engaging introduction. Before we go into the details, let's have Mr. Corbett introduce himself as well. You're muted.
So, I am on mute right now. That's okay?
Yes, you're good.
Well, thank you very much, Simone, to have me among this illustrious group of top-notch professionals. Dr. Fontaine is perhaps among the best and brightest in the business of business and economics. And Louis Robinson has a very large, extensive background in banking and supervision. As for me, I'm a little country boy from the village of Atkins. They used to call me, when I went to the academy years ago, they used to call me the nickname, the little black carrot. They say, well, we never see a black carrot before. I say, well, you get the black carrot, right? So I came down and I started playing some cricket. And then my friend used to say, but you're a black boy from the country, but you look like a Roseau boy because you do like a Roseau boy. I'd say, well, what is a Roseau boy? It turned out that you had to be among the creme de la creme, but I never was part of the creme de la creme. I happen to be in the unique, belong to the unique club. I am one of two persons who have ever managed both a national bank and a commercial and development bank in Dominica. I was the first, as a matter of fact, to become the general manager of a commercial bank and the development bank, and I was succeeded by one more person. I'm here primarily because I believe that there are a number of activities taking place in the banking business that I'd like to share my wisdom and understanding. But we'll get into that a little bit about. I'm also like to announce that I am the president of the Alternative People's Party. Believe it or not, it still exists. Notwithstanding what you were hearing over there, the Alternative People's Party still exists, and I am the president, and you'll be hearing more about us in due course. But we have a banner of the clock. That is to say, the time has come. But we'll talk more about that later on as we progress, perhaps in another segment. I'm very involved here in Florida in the affordable housing for the poor and the destitute. I am with the Catholic Charities as a director. My role here is to help find financing for home and to not only allow the homeowners to own homes, but to be able to retain them, to keep them. So I'm excited about that. I'm also a lector in my church. I read the scriptures and I love Paul and Isaiah. These guys are great. And I just a few days ago, I joined the church choir. So I'm pretty busy. I love sports. I play a lot of tennis. I'm into golf. And I'm also a regular on Aussie versus Sports Ride. That's about it for me for the time being.
Yes, thank you for that great introduction. And I see the Facebook Live audience is coming in. So come on in, guys. It is great to have you. We're looking forward to engaging with you this evening. Good evening to you, Dorian, Dorival, Augustina, John, Tina Bell, the Ramon. Auntie Hummy is here with us, Hermelina Watson, Juveni. So thank you, guys. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Come on in. And as you come in, don't forget to share the live. So we're looking forward to this discussion, this engagement this evening with our panel. And again, we thank them for being here. But just before we get started, I just wanted to give a brief update on our Dominica Child Protection Society, which is a newly formed group of Dominicans at home and abroad dedicated to protecting our children against child sexual abuse in Dominica. So we continue to work to protect our Dominican children from abuse. And so far, our summer interactive program is off to a fantastic start. We are doing the reading of the book, If You Touch, I Will Tell, where we are encouraging our young people and educating our children on how to protect themselves against sexual predators, because Kanisha Etienne's disappearance cannot be in vain. We have to continue calling her name, and we have to continue continue fighting on behalf of Kanisha as well as all of the other vulnerable children in Dominica. So far, we're grateful for the Ready, Set, Go summer camp program, where we conducted a successful interactive reading program. And we're also grateful for the Dominica Girls Guide, the Cultural Division, and the Kalinago Summer Camp program, who have all agreed to have our volunteers come by. Tanya Dixon, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on the ground for us and for being a volunteer. So again, if you want to be a part of this movement to combat child abuse in Dominica, you can always feel free to reach out to me at pushpast10@gmail.com, pushpast10@gmail.com, as we continue this important work. So again, if you're just joining us, this is Roots Connections on Q, and today we are looking at why NBD is no longer pursuing the purchase of the First Caribbean International Bank, and we're asking some important questions. Should we be concerned about this? Should we be concerned about the departure of all the international banks in Dominica and the Caribbean? And what are the implications which come with this topic? And we're happy that Mr. Ronald Lander has joined us on this discussion. Ronald, if you can give us a quick introduction of who you are, especially as it relates to the banking area. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Hello, good night, everybody.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to be on tonight with some distinguished comrades. I went to school together with Thomson Fontaine
Thank you.
at the University of West Indies. There we did our first degree. He focused on economics, while I did economics and accounting. When I returned home after doing my first degree, I was involved in the monetary section of the Ministry of Finance, where I supervised the banking sector. I had a very good experience with Mr. Alec Lazar, which I'll not speak about at this point in time. At another time, I'll speak about it. Then I went out and did a master's degree at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. And when I returned, I worked at the NDC for a while. Then I spent a significant portion of time at the Financial Intelligence Unit. I was involved with the banking sector pertaining to money laundering and financing of terrorism. I'm very happy to be on tonight, and I trust that I can add value to the discussion.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to your contribution as well as the contribution of the entire panel. So let's get the conversation started. As we get started, I believe it's important for us to provide our audience with just a general overview of banking in general. So I'm just going to throw the question out there and anyone can feel free to respond. Just kind of give us a general idea with regards to, for example, how does a local bank operate? And then let's kind of make the connection to the Caribbean region and then internationally. So let us talk about the banking system in general. Mr. Robinson, are you on? Let's try again.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, as I was saying, in Dominica, in particular, it would seem as though the powers that be do not understand the significance of the financial services sector to the whole economic development of the country. If you equate it with a car, you have a beautiful Mercedes, a BMW, whatever, and you have it in your garage, but you don't have petrol to put in it. It's just a piece of junk. It can't go anywhere. And so if you have your financial services sector, which in effect is like the heartbeat of your economy, because you do trade, you must finance it. You want to do construction, you have to finance it. You want to go into any business, you have to have money, you have to have capital, and these things come through the bank. You make your savings through the bank, and in a way, the banks do create some form of money through what we call the multiplier effect. For example, I deposit let's say I deposit $1,000 in the bank. That $1,000, the bank decides to lend, let us say, 80% of it. So they lend 80% to one person. The person uses it to do something, buy good services, whatever. And the person who receives that 80%, which is like $800, they deposit it in a bank because it pays someone who deposited back in the bank. And then somebody borrows 80% of that $800, gets some services, and then deposits it in the bank. He deposits that $800. Somebody borrows 10% of it, 90% of it, and so on and so forth. It will go to 10 times. By that process, you may end up with 10 times the original amount. So in other words, you only deposited, let's say, $1,000, but in the end, you end up with 10,000. So in effect, it's the multiplier effect. They literally create some money in a way. They don't print it. They create it by just extending the loans to each other. And this is how the economy works, because the financial service sector is incredibly important, very important. And if you don't manage it properly, if you don't have effective and good policies, you are not going to, your economy may not go anywhere. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that the other banks, like you had Scotia, you had Barclays, now you have SCIB, you have Royal Bank. They are branches of a larger bank in the international community. Now, these banks were basically, I don't think their first priority was to develop Dominica per se. Their first priority was to facilitate imports from their countries into Dominica. Or sometimes if they give assistance, then their banks were there to capture that money and return it to whichever country it came from. The Canadians gave us a lot of assistance. The British gave us, so their banks were there to capture that. The other thing I feel, though, is that because our banks don't seem to have, or the powers that be don't put emphasis on the financial services sector, we seem to be there just to facilitate aid, or the recipients of aid, or the depository for aid received from countries, rather than for promoting trade. And I think that is one of the greatest problems that we have. The other thing that I think that is not very understood properly in Dominica is that the National Bank of Dominica, as an independent, fully fledged commercial bank, it's its own entity by itself. It is not a branch of anything. The branch at Portsmouth or at Canefield are branches of the bank, but the bank itself is a fully fledged commercial entity. It has to facilitate development. It has to facilitate the growth, not only the development of but of people as well. And I think the problem, one of the problems that we have, we appoint boards that basically don't have basic banking knowledge. I mean, you could do that. Yes, you could put a farmer on the board. But the chairman of the bank should always be, in my view, either a retired banker or an experienced person who has knowledge of finance, economics, accounting. You must have these kinds of knowledge and experiences. Because
thank you, Mr. Robinson. Anyone else wants to chime in?
Yes, Simone, if I could, one of the things I wish to add as well to the whole idea or the whole concept of banking is that it is based on trust, in the sense that as individuals, we have the faith or the belief that when we surrender our hard-earned cash into the banking system, that when we are ready for this cash, we can get it back. So there is an element of trust that people basically surrender their wealth to an entity that we call a bank. And the bank then goes on to lend these monies to other people and create the money multiplier impact that was so well described by Louis, in the sense that they use whatever is put in there to give up. Now, once this confidence is gone, once people start to lose confidence in the banking system, then they begin to withdraw their monies. And if enough people withdraw their savings from the banking system, we have what is called a run on the bank, and ultimately the banking system itself can collapse. So this whole issue of confidence and faith in the banking system is critical for the long-term survival of the banking system.
Excellent. Mr. Corbett, you wanted to jump in? You're muted. Can you hear us? You're muted. Yes, there you go. Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Okay, good. I don't want to belabor what was said previously, but if you recall, years ago, we used to have what they call a SUSU sub, where the access to banking was extremely difficult. So people used to get together about a group of 10 and say, okay, they want to buy a fridge. They decide I want to take two hands, 4 or 5 weeks later, they buy the fridge. It seems to me that that's coming back in Dominica because the poor people do not have access to banking anymore. The bank have more, and then the advent of the credit union, I thought that the credit union would start to play the role that was missing for the small minority enterprise and poor people. But today the credit union has become so big, they are now competing with commercial banks. And that is the issue right now. The access to bank, in particular to credit, has become extremely difficult in Dominica. And banks are arguing now, although there's extreme liquidity within the banking system and the borrowers do not have collateral and whatnot. Talk about that a little later, the advent of the partial credit guarantee that they've got here in the region. That's supposed to be doing all that is. So by and large, the banking industry is suffering because the banks have now moved away from servicing the needs of the people as opposed to what they claim to be protecting depositors. A banker told me recently, well, Dominicans have become slaves to saving. They do not invest anymore, they want to save. So that's what we have, slave mentality in saving. Because, and I asked the question, well, what type of instruments, what is there? What else are you creating so that they could avoid placing the money and getting 1.5% or 1% per annum on interest? So by and large, the access to credit is very difficult, and we should be able to do something about it. And we'll talk about it later on as we go along.
Mr. Landa, over to you. You're muted.
What I intend to do in my submission tonight is to take a bit of an external view of the banking system.
Right.
We've got two very competent guys, Mr. Louis Robinson and Mr. Julius Corbett, who spent significant times in managing the banking system, who should talk about the internal view. But I would want to look at the bigger picture, look at it from the economic perspective. Before that, Miss Mathieu, I'm very happy to see you. I have not seen you for so long.
I was thinking the same thing. I know your family very well.
Willie and the Willie cats. I will fall from a house. I will fall from a tree. Fall in love. Fall in love. I must fall in love with you.
You must fall in love with me.
To your mother. Yeah, Willie and the Willie cats.
Yeah, she says hi.
A beautiful reunion. The National Commercial Development Bank of Dominica was established by Act number 27 of 1976. It became functional in March 1978. And it was due to the vision of Honorable Vic Riviere. Vic Riviere had a vision how he could get involved in commercial and development banking to compete with the Royal Bank and the Barclays Bank. These were the elitist banks in Dominica. Somewhere in 1982, the 8th Bank was formed. The 8th Bank was removed from the National Bank, and the 8th Bank specialized in developing aid to institutions. At this critical point in time, we had a very vibrant economy. We had export crops, we had bananas, our tourism was just about there, our manufacturing was doing very well. And because of the vibrancy of the economy, the commercial banks were doing well. The profitable operations of the banking sector is a function of a buoyant economy. What has happened in the recent past? We've seen a stagnation of the Dominican economy over an extended period of time. We don't have a main export crop since after bananas. Tourism is struggling. Yes, we're spending some CBI money in building certain facilities, but the access, be it the air access or the sea access, has been very deficient. Manufacturing also has taken a blow. Bello, brewery and beverages, Benjosimos, we've been seeing those areas deteriorating. And consequently, it is creating a problem for the commercial banking system. When we look at the main contributor to the GDP, we look at agriculture. Agriculture is a main contributor to the GDP. However, we've got a major Haitian presence in our agricultural industry. And consequently, the resources that are generated from agriculture are filtered away out of Dominica into Haiti. The other major area that we look at is construction. Who's doing the construction now in Dominica? The Chinese, the Haitians, the Jamaicans, the Lucians, the Trinis. So with all the activity, with all the health centers, with all the apartments are being built, those monies are not being filtered and involved in the banking system. We look at the wholesale and retail trade. What has happened recently in that area? The Chinese have taken over Roseau. So we've got a group of persons, be they be Chinese, be they be Haitians, be they other foreigners, who are not involving the development of the banking system. And consequently, the banking system is under a lot of stress. There's a minimal demand for banking services. And consequently, we're seeing certain banks under a lot of stress. We saw the Royal Bank recently. The Royal Bank was bought over by National Bank. The last financial statements are from the National Bank is 2020. Royal Bank was bought towards the end of 2020. 2021 is not out as yet. So I'm seeing the impact of Royal Bank on our National Bank. We saw a situation where the Scotia Bank was bought over by the Republic Bank, which was a very good initiative. We saw a consolidation, very important, a consolidation of the credit unions. If there was not that consolidation of the credit unions, I can safely say that credit unions in the external areas would have evaporated. So this is an area that we need to acknowledge and applaud for the consolidation of credit unions. We are seeing a situation in Dominica where there's a lot of cash activity, starting from the areas where Mr. Chavez was making a lot of money available to Dominica, currently with the CBI, where we're having a lot of activities happening in Dominica on a cash basis. And consequently, the services and the expertise of the commercial banks are not being employed. Consequently, the commercial banks are under a lot of pressure. And here comes the discussion about the National Bank considering taking over the First Caribbean, or what used to call the Barclays Bank. This is my first submission.
Yes, excellent, excellent points. Thank you so much for that. And I want to stay on two of the very important points that you made, Ronald, the lack of economic activity with Dominicans, that there's so many other nationalities that have their hands in the economics of Dominica, and the money is not necessarily circulated in Dominica. It's been siphoned off to other parts of the world. So I think that is an excellent point, and I want to hear the rest of the panel's view on that. And the fact that so much of the activity now, the economic activity, are cash transactions. So I think that you've raised many very important points, and I want to go over to the rest of the panel for their thoughts on that. Thomson, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to jump in, and particularly before the two bankers there, because one of the critical issues that the banks do, one of the things that the banks do, is that, as we said earlier, they take deposits and then they on lend. So banks generally make the money by on lending. Okay, they give loans, people pay interest, and that's how they make their money. What you would have noticed lately in Dominica is that the banking fees are going up. The banking fees are increasing. So, for example, if people with very low savings, we may realize that every month something is coming out of those savings. And part of the reason for this is because the banks are not lending as much. So they're not making as much revenues from loans. Therefore, they have to pay staff, they have other expenses that they have to meet, and therefore they are putting the increased charges. So we will see more of that as we go forward, as long as the banks are not able, and that happens where you have an economy that is not functioning, as the Dominican economy is not. Dominican economy is almost completely dead. As Ron said, a lot of cash transactions. There is not a lot of monies basically going into the bank, not a lot of loans coming out, not a lot of building activity. There is some, but not a lot. And because of that, because of the fact that the economy is doing so poorly, then you're going to have these knock-on effects. You're going to have those impacts on the banking system. And just to add as well, in terms of the National Bank assuming the liabilities of the First Caribbean Bank, that's probably a good thing, because if that had happened, the National Bank would now control 70% of the banking space in Dominica. So that you would probably say that is too much for one bank to have control over.
Mm-hmm. Yes, let's go over to our bankers. Julius, you have some comments you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Lander, when you said there's no economic activity taking place, one of the role of the bank is to create that activity. You understand? So why is that not happening? The banks have to as to be out there pushing. From what I understand right now, is that the banks are not pushing because the entrepreneurs are without collateral. And therefore, what the bankers are saying, there are no bankable projects per se, but that is not true. There are bankable projects. The question is that who is going to supply for these entrepreneurs, minority enterprises? Okay. Now, it is my understanding that the governments of the islands, about 6 or so, have joined together and formed what you call a partial credit guarantee, where if the borrower, the bank's lending requirements, the guarantor comes in, and the guarantor would then secure that guarantee, either through cash or some underlying collateral. In Dominica's case, we've got a lot of money hiding around. The government supposed to be out there using the cash, the excessive cash that is being held offshore to create, borrow money, should not be able to get funds there is funds available to provide that collateral. You cannot be asking the entrepreneurs to put 20% equity. They don't have the equity. And at the same time, you're making clear to them that without the equity, how can you generate how can you push the economy? So you got to get so there is excessive liquidity within the banking system. There's never it's the first time in the history of the OECS and Dominica. There's so much funds available. If you look at the banks, they all have a lot of money, yet they're not lending the funds. Why not do that? Because the governments are not pushing. Now, I understand a few weeks ago that Nia Motley came out and she was arguing that if the banks do not do something about access to credit, she's going to legislate to use all these funds that's been held offshore, and bring it back so you can protect them, Lander. You understand what I mean, Louis? These are the issues that are at hand. That we must create the collateral arrangement. So the small, so if you want to have, let's say, a healthcare business, you want to go there, you don't have the collateral, but you got the idea. So we need you to be able to develop that idea. And there's collateral out there, Thomson. There's funds available. St. Kitts, you know what they did? You know what the government St. Kitts did? They put up $2 million to help capitalize the partial credit guarantee. $12 million to capitalize that organization. I was looking at the report. I'm not seeing anywhere where this partial credit guarantee have actually used the guarantee. The World Bank gave $10 million, borrow the funds. They use part of the CBI funds to help capitalize that. So there is funds available. The question is, how do you redeploy these monies within the economy? And really, that's probably something that you in the supervision can probably tell us a little more about.
Yes, and that's a good question for you, Mr. Robinson, as well. But it's like, as I come to you for your thoughts, I think one of the points you made to me when we spoke as well is the lack of investment opportunities from, in the banks and just simply the reliance on loans. And we also have seen a very great reliance on cash. So let us talk about why that is important. You're muted. You're muted, Mr. Robinson. Oh, I think he's muted. We can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Yes, you're on. Uh-oh, we still can't hear you. Let's try again. Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. I was saying, you get out of my head because I was thinking along those lines. As he was talking, I was thinking. One of the things, as you reminded me, is the lack of investment opportunities, basically. And the other thing is the amount of cash transactions which are being mainly conducted by the government. Now, this is of concern to probably your correspondent bank, the international community. Why is it that you are dealing purely in cash? Is there a reason why basically you know that there's all this cash in the economy? I mean, whatever job is being done, the construction mainly is government building hotels and giving people money to build hotels and these sorts of stuff. But when it comes to real economic activity, the agricultural sector, the manufacturing sector, the entertainment sector, even the tourism sector, well, they're building these hotels. But when you have built the hotels and you bring the tourists in, what else is there for the tourists to remain here? Or beaches are not properly kept, or rivers are disappearing. We don't have a forest per se that people, for example, the trail, which was meant to cross from Scott's Head to Capuchin, which probably should be a good tourist attraction, that is not functioning. The other thing is that somebody mentioned these industries that went out, and I think Julius mentioned the fact that the bank has to create the opportunities. Why should DCP have left? Why should Kubuli have left? Why should Coke have left? Why should these people have left? I will give you an example. When I was at the National Bank, I remember when I came on board, the Kubuli was on the verge of extinction. At one point in time, the same gentleman who managed Harris Paints managed Kubuli at the same time. That is to tell you how Kubuli was. I went to the factory because I knew the manager. He was a friend of mine for a very long time. I went to him and I said, how can we help? He said, are you crazy? Nobody in the banking industry has ever come to this factory. What are you doing here? I said, I want to help because it's a local product. It employs local people. The money turns around in the economy. We export the product. We started talking and I said, well, Heineken's has reduced the size of their beer bottle, but yours remain the same. I will drink about 5 Heinekens, but I can only drink 2 Kubuli. He said, well, I need about $5-6 million to retool and this kind of stuff. We have gone to the bank. Nobody will lend him. I said, look, give me a proposal and how much you want. And he said, no, they won't give it to you. I said, give me the proposal. He gave me the proposal for 5 or 6 million. I think it was 5 million he wanted. And luckily, we had persons on the board like Mr. Colin Bully, Mr. Norman Rule, Mr. Frank Barron. And I think they understood when the proposal went, because there was opposition, but when the proposal went, they were the ones who basically added strength to the proposal. Within 1 year, Kubuli had come out of the red and were in the black.
Mm-hmm.
And they came back later and they said, look, this is our position right now. We owe the government 1.6 million in taxes, but they will take $1 million, but we don't have the $1 million to give them right now. Could you help again? I said, sure, I tried. And again, the board thing. They were able to put $600,000 back into their profit immediately. Take it out of the provision to pay this tax debt. And so Kubuli stayed. After the Erica, the first thing the Prime Minister says, oh, well, he will not be extending any concessions. DCP moved out.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kubuli again, after Maria now, factory went in, they moved out. Now, where were the banking? Well, I didn't expect Scotia or Royal or FCIB to go and do anything. It wasn't coming from Canada. It wasn't coming from the United Kingdom. It's a local product, local development. But I expected the National Bank to go out there and ask DCP, what can we do? How can we help? What is it you need? Okay. Instead, but the government now, while they were not going to extend any concessions, were able to give $6 million to one of the passport sellers to go and make bar soap. Now, since 1980, Dominicans have been looking powder or liquid soap. People don't wash in the river anymore. People use washing machine. Can you put bar soap in a washing machine? But this is the sort of lack of the opportunity. And when we talked about the credit union, I recall certain persons who were mad at me when I said to the government, the credit union movement has gone past what its initial purpose. It is now a fully fledged commercial financial entity. Therefore, I don't think the cooperative division has the capacity to oversee or regulate that sector anymore. So therefore, it should come under the financial services in the ministry. People were mad at me because the government did do just that, and they were telling people, well, government wants us to take your money. But this is the sort of thing. And also, Brother Landa there mentioned the FIU. Now, I recall when the government changed in 2000, somewhere down around May or June, around there, the then Prime Minister, Mr. Rosie Douglas, met me one day and he said, look, we are on the blacklist and I want you to prepare, do something for us to get off the blacklist. I give you 2 weeks to prepare it, to give me something. I'm going out. When I come back, you must have it.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
It's a negative list. It's a negative list. It's not blacklist. Everything is black. It's a
at the time, I know. But that's what it was called at the time. Anyway, so I did prepare this stuff. And within a week, he's somewhere in New York and he called and he wants a draft, which I don't know. I had a draft ready, so I sent it to him. And the whole idea of the Financial Intelligence Unit was to function in absence of what I had initially proposed to the government, was to set up your own supervisory and oversight arrangement. And you can do examination of these institutions separately or jointly with the ECCB. And you could do that by, first of all, getting the funding by one of these international organizations for about 5 years, the initial 5 years, at which time, when you go to visit or examine these entities, you charge them so much per hour per examiner, so you can build up some funds, so you wouldn't have to rely on the consolidated fund for financing that entity.
Mm-hmm.
That was the original idea. So the slip up was, instead of going through the embassy to the State Department to require the assistance, they went straight to the DEA. Departments cannot extend aid or that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. You go through the State Department via your embassy, and then they will direct which agency could provide the assistance.
Right, right. And I think, Mr. Robinson, you're making some really great points, and I want to thank you for that. But I want us to take a closer look at why the international banks, because I just find it incredible that now we have not one international bank in Dominica. So Ronald and Mr. Corbett, I want to come over to you guys for that one. And then Thomson, I want you to speak with us about the role of the CBI, the role of potential money laundering in the region, and all the importance that may play in what we're seeing in terms of the banking system. But before we do, we're coming up on the 9 p.m. hour. DJ Sean, if you're still with us, we would like to run the phone numbers for anyone who would like to call in and make a contribution. And we're going to just jump on the Facebook Live while everyone on the panel kind of rest your voice for just a minute before we come back to you and see what our comments are on Facebook. So DJ Sean, again, if you're still with us, we would need for the phone numbers to be called out so that our callers can join us. So Dorian, blessed night, greetings to all. I'm waiting to hear some good vibes. Thank you for being here. Dorian, Augustina, good evening, everyone. Antoria, Canada is locked in. Thank you for being here. Tina, again, thank you for being here. Humanila Watson, thank you again for being here. Owen Prosper, good evening, patriotic family. I am locked. Thank you for being here. David Johnson, always great to see you. Pyro Davidson, thank you for being here. Sam Kelly, good evening to you. Nixie Alfred, Claralyn Warrington, hi, good night to you all. I'm locked in. Thank you, Claralyn. My mom says LOL to Ronald's comments, Willie and the Willie Cats. Thank you for being here. Medina Senhouse, my mom, always a pleasure to have you on board. Irvin Hamilton, let's see what Irvin is saying. Not too long ago, a loan officer at NCCU was telling me that the loan officers were discussing that not many people are coming for loans. There is a serious problem with our economy and banking system, but Dominicans prefer COing than taking note. Carl Kofi James, my friend, great to see you. He says, late for class. I'm here nonetheless. Greetings, respect, and love to all. Carl, always a pleasure having you on board. Juanita Prince is locked in. Victorious is God's plan. Interesting discussion. Thank you, Victorious. Lavella James, Brooklyn, New York, listening. Swinging Janice, great to see you, my friend. Great financial team. Omar Monell, another incredible supporter. Evening, wonderful discussion. So thank you guys. Thank you all for being here. Don't forget to share the live as we continue talking about the implications of the international banks leaving Dominica and the Caribbean region. And many of us are starting to feel the pinch because in my case, a simple wire transfer no longer went through. And I think we have other people who can share their experiences. So while you're on the Facebook Live and as you get ready to call in, you can tell us about any particular situation that you've had recently concerning the banking operations in Dominica. Marshall Lawrence, always great to see you. Good evening, all. Better late than never. And guys, don't forget, if you miss any portion of the program, once we sign off, you can always go back and watch the entire program on Facebook Live at Q95 FM Radio, or you can jump on the Q95DA.com website and you will be able to see this and other programs that we've had along the way. And Didier, nice to see you. She says, I'm watching. So DJ Shan, over to you as you give us the phone numbers so that our listeners can call in as well.
All right, the numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097. If you're calling from a DG phone, 616-4257. And if you're calling on the overseas line, 305-432-9624. Let me just repeat these numbers again. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. And if you're calling on the overseas line, 305-432-9624.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, DJ Shan. Thank you for that. Yes, so Ronald and Mr. Corbett, let's come over to you guys, Mr. Land and Mr. Corbett, as we talk about the international. Why do we believe that we saw the exodus, the movement of these banks out of Dominica? And from what I understand, many of them have also left the Caribbean region. So why did we see that, and why is that important?
Well, Landa, I'm going to take that briefly. I think the growth of anti-money laundering laws has a lot to do with that. And the refusal or the inability of certain governments to institute anti-money laundering laws in various jurisdictions. And as a result, international banks lose appetite for doing business in the region. In addition to that, Simone, is technology.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, I believe you can use Cash App and all these fancy download and transfer funds without having to go for international banks. And the international trade is what we are doing a lot in the Caribbean. It doesn't happen as before. We do not, and we just alluded to that a few minutes ago, that the exports, what we used to rely on bank, for example, you come to National Bank and you says, I want to buy an issue letter of credit because I'm buying some things from Hong Kong. So you come to the bank, you apply for a letter of credit, and you provide collateral, or you use the inventory. That's not happening anymore. So all this lack of international trade activities is causing the banks to say, wait a while, why do we really want to be here? Moreover, respective governments are very lackadaisical, they are lax in implementing anti-money laws and regulations, the lack of supervision, and therefore they would like to minimize the risk. They want to reduce the exposure in these islands. And they are very quickly want to say, let's diversify, let's get out of here. There's no need to be in these small islands anymore. They did what they did initially when we were trying to export things from the United States and Canada. They don't need us anymore. So you're going to see that. And therefore, why Louis talked about a while ago, because I think Thomson alluded to that, because they are not lending much more, and the fees, interest rates, and not the income from interest income is low, the cost of doing business internationally. You try and for example, use a wire transfer. It might take you days,
Months.
Because one bank says, well, we don't have correspondent banking relationship with this country. We don't have, so it takes you 3 or 4 days. You go to London, you go to Zurich, you go to New York, you go to Pakistan, wherever you can, where you can find a correspondent banking relationship. And guess what? You may not have one. The government say, we don't know these guys, so we're not going to take people's money. So it makes it very difficult for international bankers to continue. And that is why in small island states like Dominica, what they should be doing, rather than trying to buy the foreign branch of an international bank, is perhaps take an equity position, Louis, so you can at least say, okay, Bank of America, BA, is going to be our correspondent banking for years. So we will now start to take an interest, buy a position at BA. So BA say, okay, well, we have a in Dominica, we will have to have a relationship in Dominica rather than to have to go through all the series, buying a draft, making a wire transfer, and then use cash apps. A cousin of mine sent me, he said, can I send you $20? I said, I don't need 20, but he said, I just want to test the market. He sent $20, and within minutes, it was in my account. Whereas you go and stand in the line, and you pay $40 to send, $50 to a friend back home? This is costly. So we are going to see the lack of interest in the international banks, and we're going to see that the service of banking itself dissipate. It's going to.
Yes, excellent. Ronald, let me come over to you, and let's also talk about the implications, because I'm happy Mr. Corbett mentioned about how long does a transaction take, because even recently I was in Dominica and simply depositing a check into National Bank, a check from Bank of America, now takes 6 weeks to be cleared. And as far as I can recall, I was able to have these checks in the past cleared in a matter of a couple of days. So I think there are real implications for individuals, as Caribbean people, as well as implications for doing business. Because here is what is the irony. The irony is that now that we have the technology to be able to embrace e-commerce, but without the ability to have a robust banking system, then it's futile. So I want to come over to you as you tell us your thoughts on why, the banks have left, and also the implications we are currently seeing, as well as the implications we may see in the future.
And Simone, you made a good statement here when you said that by using technology and not deploying this one within the local economy, it bypasses. So it's not residing on the island, so you can on land. That's the issue. It's bypassing all the mechanisms.
Right. Ron.
We have a serious production side problem in Dominica. During the time when we were very productive, Royal Bank and Barclays Bank was thriving in Dominica. When Mr. Riviere came with the idea of having the National Bank They laughed at us. They call it the Quapo Bank. But Mr. Riviere had some vision what he wanted to do. However, over a period of time, because of the lack of production and also the involvement of the Financial Action Task Force in putting certain recommendations for money laundering and terrorist financing, it has put a lot of pressure on the foreign banks. In the first instance, we are not making money because we're not in a productive economy. There's not a demand for our services. And on the other hand, we talk about economists, two hands economists. They say only we want one hand economists because economists talk about one hand and on the other hand. On the other hand, you've got more regulations being put in place by the FATF, put into money laundering and terrorist financing. So it's putting more stress on those foreign banks. And consequently, they are de-risking. They are moving away from areas they view as high risk. And recently, the International Financial Reporting Standard number 9 requires a certain level of provisioning for loan impairment, which is also putting a lot of pressure on the banking system. And consequently, those foreign banks are not seeing the viability in operating in small island states which they view as high risk. We, in turn, in those small island states, have to pay attention to the production side problem and work with our commercial banks, our local commercial banks, and our local credit unions to grow our economy. There's also a problem with corresponding banking relationships. Certain banks have a great difficulty in getting correspondent banks to ensure that they stay in the international financial infrastructure. So this is a major consideration. But I am of the firm opinion, I'm of the firm considered opinion that if we can pay attention to the production side, we can be more productive. The resources, because we have a lot of resources, financial resources now from the CBI. If we can put those resources in the productive areas and create a demand for banking services, banks in Dominica can be much more viable.
Great point. Great point. Thank you for that. Thomson, you want to chime in? And also let's talk about the implication of, the CBI and everything else that comes along with it.
Before you go
Yes.
further here, look at the
Yes.
critical situation of Ross University. Why did we lose Ross?
Right.
Ross was creating so much activity in Dominica. That was
And the ripple
medical
effect of
tourism.
the financial opportunities Ross created.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Creating demand for financial institutions. You had a National Bank had a branch down in Ross that has disappeared because Ross is no longer there. The activity that Ross was creating, why did we lose Ross?
If I could just chime in.
Yes, Mr. Robinson.
One of the things that happens is the high level of non-performing loans, because Mr. Lander talked about the IFRS, all right? And I found out in the Caribbean, some of these banks have non-performing loans up to 50%, as high as 50%. This is madness. You imagine you have 500, let's say you have $500 million in deposits. You lend 480 million. 50% of that is non-performing. Now, these deposits they don't belong to the bank, they belong to different individuals. If they were to come to get their money, they can't get it because it is not there. A lot of that had to do with the way they were not doing proper loan loss allowance, and they were not provisioning effectively for these sorts of things. And the reason for that is because the National Bank, for example, were not conducting loan reviews. They didn't have a loan review officer. They didn't have an internal audit function that would even review those things. They didn't even have a credit analyst before 2001. So those are some of the National Bank. There are people with potential. The younger people should have the potential to do these things. They can go to school, they can do it now. But remember, most of the staff who staffed the National Bank initially were persons who came from these branch banks. None of these branch banks had internal auditors in Dominica. They didn't develop their policies in Dominica. All these sorts of things were not developed. So therefore, those persons who came from these branches of the International Bank, they could not put these policies in place. When I went to the National Bank, they didn't even have a proper lending policy. They had no loan loss provisioning policy or program. They didn't even have an internal auditor. And so, and this was in 2000, the bank was functional in 1978. Another problem that I think they did wrong was to remove the bank from the 1976 Act under which it was created and put it under the Companies Act. Because the sort of things that they did, it could do all the services under the Act. Because most of the older banks in Europe are all established by Parliament, but they are not government entities. They're just established by the Parliament. But there were certain things that they did when they changed it to the Companies Act that they could not have done if it was under the Banking Act. The other thing too is that there was a lack of training for staff. They would just send somebody, say, well, you're in advances or you're in loans. What did they know about loans? They didn't know about, and one of the things I found incredible was that people did not, you made a loan and that was it. Mm-hmm. They didn't talk to the borrower until maybe the borrower defaulted maybe for 3-4 months. And even then they didn't talk to them because they didn't understand. When I got there, I decided I had to get a vehicle for the lending department, and that the staff of the lending department would work in the office 3 days a week, and the other 2 days you have to go and visit every customer the bank have, talk to them, see what they're doing. If you lend somebody a timber, you go out and you see, well, okay, how are you doing with your sewing? And, tell them, okay, so make a handkerchief for me and pay them. But you keeping it, but this is not done. Mm-hmm. They sit down and they expect somebody to come to them and ask them for a loan. You also have a response. Go out and say, okay, how can we help you? What are you doing? And so on and so forth. I remember there was a lady who was doing a housing project. It was a good product. Did the bank help? No. They waited until there was default and all this kind of stuff, and then they tell them, bring my money for me. And this is not how you do banking.
Right. So
training.
Yes. Right. So, Mr. Robinson, I think you're pointing out to us a lot of areas where, the banking system is lacking and where there is need for improvement. So thank you for that. Dr. Fontaine, let's come over to you for your thoughts in general. And then let's talk about the implications of the role of the CBI and money laundering and all that in the Caribbean region. And then Omar Monel, thank you for the questions. I see them. I'm coming to them in just a minute. So give me a minute, okay? Thanks. Yes, Thomson. You're muted.
Yes, indeed. I want to join a few of these things, and I want to come back in particular to the fact that a number of the banks are running away. You cap point hui, as you would say in Dominica. And the question is why? I mean, Barclays Bank, Royal Bank, and so on. I met those banks in Dominica. These banks are older than me, which means they're 70 and above, right? Years in Dominica. Yet they're only living now. And the question is, why have they left within the last 5-10 years? And why not before? And the question is simple. It has to do again with the correspondent banking relationships. Those banks, even the foreign banks, when any transaction is being conducted, anybody sending money from overseas, those transactions have to go through a clearinghouse. Okay, any foreign currency transaction must be cleared by a foreign bank. That's what we refer to as the correspondent bank. In other words, a bank that is locally residing in Dominica must have a relationship with a bank residing in New York, preferably in New York, that will clear those transactions. So if, for example, you have somebody in Florida who is going to send money to Dominica, they go to their bank in Florida to deposit, to send that transfer. That transfer has to go to New York. It has to be cleared in New York, and then it comes to Dominica. Now, in the view of the Caribbean as a whole becoming a haven for drug trafficking and the movement of a lot of cash, so a lot of money was flowing through the banking system, the authorities in the United States decided that they wanted to take action against these types of behaviors, drug trafficking in particular, and also monies that were being used to finance terrorist activities and so on. So how do you do that? Well, you go to the banks where the monies are being cleared and tell them you need to know who this money is going to and who this money is coming from. Okay, you have to be able to tell us. But they went a step further. They threatened the banks that if we found out that monies were used, say for example, monies coming to Dominica were diverted for some terrorist operation and so on, you would be fined. I remember in one case, the Bank of America, they were threatened with a fine of $1.2 billion. Now you can never make that kind of money in Dominica, or if you combine the Caribbean together, you're not going to make $1.2 billion in a year in profits. So the banks are saying, what is in it for me? Why should I risk being fined those hefty fines, which has the potential of crippling my bank, to support banks in the Caribbean, where we know it is awash with drug returns? Now, when you add on top of those drug returns, you begin to add the issue of CBI funds, which makes me believe that the CBI funds are not all above board. Because if they were, for example, if they were as the proceeds that goes to bananas were, we would not have had a problem. Because if you can prove that you're selling the bananas and you're being paid for those bananas, then you have no problems, right? It should not be an issue. So why is it that the CBI funds are an issue? Is it possible that some individuals are using that as a conduit to launder funds through that system? And the way that could be done, for example, is if a passport is worth $100,000, probably individuals are paying $300,000 for this passport, and this money is somehow getting back to them through some other means. I'm asking this because I'm saying that it cannot be that a legitimate government making a legitimate business would have so much problems. So it does appear to me, from where I sit and from what I know of having looked into the banking system, of having spent time in the Cayman Islands in the offshore banking sector, I would suspect that there were concerns about the CBI money. So because of that, the correspondent banking relationships are in trouble. So the foreign banks are picking up and leaving, but banks like National Bank that has nowhere to go, but need to keep making those transactions, they are having problems, to the extent now where they are being told that even when a Dominican walks into your branch and deposits US currency, unless that person have an account with you, you cannot accept this money. It's not coming locally. That is imposed by the correspondent banks, because at some point those monies are exchanged. You see, so that tells me two things. Firstly, that our banking sector is in serious problems, and this could have an impact not only on that, but also on the MoneyGram and other means of transfer, PayPal and other means of transfers that we are using. Potentially it could impact it. And secondly, it tells me that there is a lot more concern about our CBI monies than we have been told by our government. And that to me is worrying on both fronts.
Yes, excellent. And we have some excellent comments coming in on Facebook Live, so we're going to get to them. But I just want to open up the floor to all the panel, everyone, and just ask, should we be interested in having these banks return to our shores? Is there a need? Is there a benefit for trying to recruit these international banks back to Dominica? So, Mr. Lander, let me come over to you. What are your thoughts on that? Is there a benefit? Should we be making any effort to try to get these banks back to our shores?
Yes. When I went to the AGM, National Bank AGM, and I understood that we were about to purchase Royal Bank, I was very concerned because we need those international institutions in Dominica to enhance our international reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And I raised some questions about the purchase of Royal Bank. And the management, the board of directors said they couldn't say anything much. They felt that they were doing a good business decision. That was in the 2020 annual report. The 2021 annual report has not come out as yet to show the impact of the involvement of Royal Bank. I think it would be a faulty decision at this point in time to get involved in the purchase of the Barclays Bank. In a contracting economy, you should not be expanding, you should be consolidating. And you should allow other persons to come in to take the risk of development. And the way I see it going, and the ECCB has made a proper decision to say to our national bank, stay away from the First Caribbean. Allow the First Caribbean to operate as a separate institution. The same way that the Republic Bank came in and took over the Scotia Bank and is now operating as an independent entity, we need to have other international, only regional, but other regional institutions coming in. So in the banking sector, we can have a very good oligopoly where you've got several players, international players involved and competing at a very high level, giving good services, but fundamentally, what needs to be done in Dominica is to solve the production side problem. If we do not solve the production side problem, there will not be a demand for banking services. And consequently, regional and international institutions will not be interested in coming in to invest. So the government and the other agencies related to government has to find a way of solving that production side problem. The minimal production that we are doing now in Dominica is done by foreign entities. All the apartments, all the health centers. You've got a guy, whoever he is, using our passport money and using the Chinese. I've never seen a Chinese anytime in the bank. I have my little drinks from time to time. I've never seen a Chinese having a drink where I'm having my drinks. I don't drink as much as a father.
Just a little, Ron.
It's so fundamental.
Simone,
Fundamental that the persons that are involved in the economy, be it agriculture, be it construction, that those persons are involved in requesting services within the economy. I'm certainly sure if more Dominicans were involved in the constructions of the health centers, of the apartment buildings, there will be a greater demand on the financial institutions. Because we're making monies and they want to request services to improve the quality of their life.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the fundamental problem,
Right.
the production side problem.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Corbett, Mr. Robinson, any thoughts?
and Simone,
Go ahead, Corbett.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Corbett.
let me say this. You asked a question a while ago as to is there a need for international banking in Dominica?
Mm-hmm.
So it bodes to us a question. What is the role of international banking in a developing economy?
Mm-hmm.
One of them is to facilitate trade and investments. Before, we used to have what we call the FDI, foreign direct investments. Most companies used to use that FDI. The process, forms, and procedures was done through the FDI, through international banks. Today, regrettably, most of all the CBI, the Citizens by Investment Initiative, have somewhat replaced FDI. And moreover, that CBI funds right now is virtually unregulated. And what I'm saying here is that there are various components to it. Certain section of it goes towards what they call the real estate. Certain portion go towards development, but it does not come under the supervision of Parliament. So there's an escrow account being set aside that is being managed by a contractor and a developer. These funds do not go through the banking system per se. It's sitting there, but it's not being unused. In fact, it comes in there, it resides very shortly. It is being used to disburse funds that is being used simultaneously for a flight of capital. It leaves the country virtually at the same time because the persons who are out there withdrawing funds under this escrow are expats. They're living outside the country. So you are not able to redeploy these CBI funds within the local economy, Simone. That's the crux of the matter. So where does the international bank really come in? There's no FDI.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of international trade per se. There's very little need for trade financing and credit financing export market. So where are they going, Louis? Where there's no need. And so when I understand that there was a desire by NBD to acquire FCB, I said, for what reasons? Who is the managing director who goes to the board and tells the board, listen, let's buy FCB? And what does my friend and my buddy Gibbs do? He said, well, why are you presenting that to us? And then you come back and say for a press release that NBD has no longer a strategic interest in that acquisition. Why did it ever even generate? What was it behind? What was the purpose unless there's going to be synergies? What type of synergistic effect is going to take place? Mm-hmm. I didn't understand it. I really did not understand. So there's this political statement where we're no longer interested. There's no strategic interest. So by and large, I have been involved in strategic planning. As a matter of fact, when I was at the Aid Bank and the National Bank, I presented the bank's strategic plan for the next 4 or 5 years, where we want to go, how we're going to get there. Yeah. What type of financing mechanism that the bank was going to use to acquire FCIB? Were they going to equity financing, debt financing? What instruments are going to use? It's the same thing, and why I have to ask the same question: what funding source did the government use to acquire Dominic, for example? Do we know what? Have we have any idea? So things are happening. You know why? Because there is a lot of funds that's being held outside the local jurisdiction without no control procedures. So my answer to the question that I see very little need for international banking service in Dominica right now in the Caribbean. Because the governments don't have the anti-money laundering laws to protect these international banks. There's a lot of cash that's moving through political pouches, how you call it. Funds. Just recently, I understand.
Diplomatic pouch.
Diplomatic pouch. I understood, Simone, that recently someone in Thibault's home, $500,000 was found in a suitcase. How did it happen? How did it arrive? Did it go for the international banking process? Did it go for the banking system? No. That is how things are happening in Dominica. CBI, let's talk about CBI. Who are the primary beneficiaries of CBI project? The hoteliers, 1 or 2, 3, Anichi, Secret Bay, Tranquility, Jungle Bay, 4 of them, 5 or 6. These are the key recipients of the CBI program. Are being used for what? It's being used for in the hospitality. It's not being used in the productive sector.
Which is what Ronald was talking about, the need for production.
You need the productive sector. You need that. And guess what? Under the Caribbean partial credit guarantee, the government can use all this cash as the underlying collateral to secure the debt. Which brings back to my original comment that there's no one in Dominica, no entrepreneur who wants $50,000, $100,000 right now should not be able to get it. And Louis, you said about there's high loan losses. There should be loan losses, Louis, because the government can absorb it. So what they're doing is, you know what the government is doing with CBI funds right now? Creating wealth creation for individuals. People have had their own home ownership with no macroeconomic effect taking place, Simone. A few persons are obviously own their home. But what is doing for the macroeconomic activities taking place? None. So I want the Prime Minister, I hope he's listening, or he's been listening, that, sir, use those cash you have sitting overseas to support your guarantee so that the young entrepreneurs can go there, go to the banks without collateral, with very little equity, and grow the economy. Because we need microeconomic activity so that it can have a macroeconomic effect on the country.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And Mr. Robinson, I want to come to you, but let me jump on Facebook real quick and just take some comments. And what I would like for everyone on the panel to do is kind of just take some notes on any questions you want to answer to, or any comments you want to make with regards to our Facebook live comments. And I really want to thank everyone who's here and participating in our discussion this evening. So again, just take some notes on any of the points that you want to respond to as I get ready to read some of our comments and questions. Omar Monel asked, why are Dominicans not able to use financial transfer options like Zelle, Venmo, Cash App, etc.? He continues, why are international Dominicans required to sign a W-9 to open a bank account? Why is it necessary for international Dominicans to provide large amounts of personal information to open an account? Information such as job history, home address, job address, driver's license, passport, annual salary, frequency of deposits, etc. Detouche Alfred, well, wanted to hear from Thomson. I think we covered that. Detouche, I'm happy that you reached out to us. Victorious is God's plan. Banks have left because there is an inability to generate revenues in the country because of one, fake entrepreneurship. People are not seeking financing for business anymore because they are getting cash from the government. Two, home ownership. People are not taking loans for mortgages anymore because they are getting homes for free. And three, risk of money laundering, that CBI issue. Overall, government is giving out too much money too much cash in the economy. And then Omar comes back and says another question was the reason for NBD share sales to provide solvency to purchase FCIB, or was it to help cover negative debt, or is this standard practice? Let's see, Evadne Walsh, international financial institutions are terminating business relationships with these local banks, a practice that is called de-risking. And I think one of our panel members talked about that. Quite a few people talked about that this evening. And she continues, when government and local banks fail to implement global AML standards, this is a cause for concern for global financial institutions like CIBC. Hence, best approach to reduce their risk is to exit the region, which in turn makes banking difficult for the region. So some excellent points and questions. Glenda Burton says, good evening, listening attentively, very interesting program. Hi to Mr. Lander. And Omar has one more question, last question with regards to that latest housing initiative by the government geared towards young professionals. How does the Treasury benefit from a loan taken to buy one of the houses via the bank? Also, is the bank really the institution taking the highest risk with this venture? Andrew says, great point, Mr. Lander. Omar also says, cheers to you, Andrew. I've never seen a Chinese by Ma Boyd. Andrew, it sounds like you frequent Ma Boyd quite often. So that's a good one. Juanita, serious stuff. Mr. Lander, Eliza, good evening, everyone. Victorious, but there's an FIU which could have the responsibility of the FBI, but it is not independent and lacks the necessary expertise. Let's see here. And she also says, why was it impossible to get lenders back to pay back the aid bank? What was the strategic plan to ensure payback? And then Monel, Omar, where is the aid bank and what is it doing? So lots of comments and lots of contributions from our Facebook Live audience. And we want to thank them for always being on board and always being ready to make a contribution to our programming. So Thomson, let me come over to you. Anything stands out?
Yes, sure, Simone. I wanted to comment on the questions that were raised by Monel in particular, and I'm sure can be backed up by the two bankers there. I think with regards to the volume of information being requested, that is all part of the Know Your Customer. That's all in the context of the anti-money laundering, the AML legislation that we are talking about, where the banks are required to know exactly who they're dealing with. So if you're living overseas and you wish to open an account locally, they need to find out your information, where you're working. You probably have to show them even a wage slip or something, because they want to know that any transfers coming into your bank are from a legitimate source. So that will explain the reason for all those questions. With regards to the W-9, the W-9 basically is a report that goes to the IRS from the institution. So you know that in the United States, the IRS charges the person's income, even their savings account. You pay in your savings. So that is one way the U.S. authorities try to control people avoiding taxes. Because it means, for example, that if you could open an account in Dominica without the W-9, you could be putting monies into this account without the knowledge of the IRS. So that's some of the requirements that the banks have to do now. So that the banks will now have to submit to the IRS your savings at the end of the year, so that the IRS can in turn tax you. So all of this is just part of what the U.S. regulators have been doing of late. Firstly, to guard against anti-money laundering, and secondly, to make sure that people are not evading taxes.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, anyway, to add to what Thomson said with the Know Your Customer, in fact, they must also, what they do is they build a profile so you can be risk low, medium, or high. Now, when they ask you those questions, for example, they categorize you. You must say, okay, I'm going to be depositing every month $5,000. Okay, so you're allowed maybe a percentage, 5-10% deviation. But if you say every month you're going to deposit 5,000 and then you start depositing 10,000 every 2 weeks, somebody will call you in and say, well, have you increased business? I mean, you have another job, are you generating this income and so on? But what happens is it becomes unpleasant because people who are not properly trained, they tend to interrogate you rather than trying to say, okay, you want to get the information, but you say, okay, well, I notice your income has increased. Maybe we want to develop a new product for you. So, you may be in the car rental business now, or you may be, that's what they want to know. Okay, what is the additional income? But where are you getting this money? Like, I remember there's an instant where somebody who was normally was a good customer of an institution, he went to make a deposit and they decided, oh, he's a money launderer. The man has never been charged, never been arrested. It's just old talk. And then you refuse to do that. So the person, what they did was say, okay, besides, say, can I speak to the manager? Because he's a big depositor, a very good customer. Go to so the manager said, you have to take the person's money. Because if you suspect the person is involved in illegal activity or the money is illegal, you don't refuse it. You take the money and you file what you call a suspicious activity report.
Yeah, SDR, yeah.
And you must have a policy on preparing and filing the report. That is another thing that I find there's an absence of the understanding of that whole thing. There must be a process. You must decide who files it and who has the access to the information. You may not have to tell the manager, well, John Brown, we file a suspicious activity report for John Brown, but you must provide the general manager and the board with a report that says, for this month, we filed 2 suspicious activity reports. That is the sort of thing that they don't do. And they interrogate people, so it goes as it's intimidating. But this thing has gone on, and it is because of correspondent banking that these things came by.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a minority report by Mr. Levin, who was then in the Senate banking report, sometime in 96, 97, somewhere about there, where they did this thing and they found out that there was a lot of money laundering going on, not at the US bank, but at their correspondent in the different islands or countries. Now, the other thing that I'm concerned about, is how that the absence of these international banks is going to impact migrant transfer. I don't know whether in our composition of our GDP, whether we factor in migrant transfers. Maybe because we don't do it to that extent, because our migrant transfer comes in the form of barrels. Now, I recall when the previous administration was in office, they had suggested to persons it would be more beneficial to the individual and to the economy at large if they would send the money instead of buying goods and sending a barrel. And the administration who was in opposition at the time, they are now there. Oh, they don't want you there. We won't charge you on the barrel. We won't charge you to send your barrel in, because they didn't have the foresight to understand the concept of migrant transfer. Now, if you notice, the Santo Domingans, the Haitians, the Chinese, they don't send barrel, they send money. You know what is the migrant transfer figure for Mexico and the United States? It's in the billions.
Yep.
The Mexicans remit billions of dollars to Mexico. It goes into the economy, it helps the economy. So I wanted to see how would that, the absence of these foreign banks figure into things. The other thing with this, with the FCIB, there are three things I would consider. First of all, why did the NBD not go into it? They may have done their due diligence and found that the non-performing loans or the bad loan was very high. Or they may not have the funds to purchase the assets. Or they would need to have a different structure. For example, what the National Bank, I think, because they had to increase their capital some time ago, because of this same problem, they didn't let people know, but because of the non-performing loan, the level of non-performing, they had to increase their capital. So, and even the credit unions had to do it by way of now telling people they're buying additional shares, but it's actually raising their capital. Okay. So these are some of the issues. So if the National Bank could change its structure, they could have a bank holding company. So it would give them more things to raise capital. There's an Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange. They could trade the shares on the Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange. The other thing is that I don't find our private sector are very entrepreneurial, because they claim they have a lot of money. They do have a lot of money. So why don't they? These are things for the private sector. The other day, the government had a $56 million overdraft. It went to $150-something million.
Mm-hmm.
How could the board of directors sit down there and allow you to exceed your limit by $100 million? The whole board should be fired. The whole bank should be fired. But they don't do these things. And then when they get one of the international agencies commenting or suggesting that they do something, they say, oh, it's because they're little island and they're beating on them. Instead of use an opportunity. Challenges present opportunities. And they don't want to do these things because this housing option with the CBI program. Remember, real estate, car dealerships, these are some of the largest avenues for money laundering.
Mm-hmm.
And I notice in Dominica, they don't have anybody categorized as high risk or anything or anybody.
Yeah,
they
thank
don't.
you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you so much for your contribution. Mr. Corbett, let me come over to you. Anything you want to comment on with regards to the Facebook Live comments or just in general? Our time is very quickly coming to an end, so you may also want to use this as an opportunity for your final thoughts as well. You're muted.
I'm muted here, but I think Louis and Thomson covered most of the salient points that I would comment on. I think there is one thing we've got to remember is migration. People move around quite easily.
Right.
And nowadays you have 2 free passports. You can be in one country here, another country here, and just bring money around. So the entire system has changed. The banking system cannot cope with all this lack of regulations or excess regulations in what way shape or form you put it. Documentation is very important from the standpoint of ensuring that they're meeting the standards that are established. If the standards are lacking. So back to the whole thing about NBD and a question, I'm not privy to all what I'm hearing Louis talking about as to why they might. I think there are 3 reasons why I believe they probably didn't have the funds available, or someone say, listen, it's not the best interest of the bank, or we don't have any appetite for it right now. The economy is not growing fast enough, and we have excess liquidity, and we cannot really lend. And therefore, we have to now concentrate on more. The bank become a more fee-based bank as opposed to an interest-based bank. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you very
One
much.
thing, if
Yes.
I just may comment a little bit. Somebody said that we don't have laws. That is incorrect, because I know the previous administration had developed banking regulations. The problem is that when the offshore sector, they had established the basic things for these sorts of stuff. And instead of this administration going forward and enhancing those, or to meet with the movement of the institution, instead of expanding the sector, because the offshore sector, they don't take deposits from locals, but they can use those funds for development in the community. And so there were legislation, there were laws, because I looked at them, the way the process, and so, but some of the persons who were administering those things did not implement those laws effectively. They did not. They decided to do it, at their own will. If they feel like doing it, they did it. If they like somebody, they did it. If they didn't like you, that was it. And
Right.
so
Thank
there were laws there for the offshore sector. I think
Yes.
the government is just not into banking. They have no idea. They don't know what they're doing. So the
Right.
financial services sector goes by the way, instead of it's getting its prominence in the economy overall.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Dr. Fontaine, your thoughts, final thoughts as we wind down for the evening.
Yes, thanks, Simone. I just would like to add as well. I think the decision was taken out of the hands of the National Bank of Dominica as regards the purchase of First Caribbean Bank. My understanding that it was a decision of the banking regulators, the ECCB, not to allow the transaction to go through, and
That's
for
right.
good reason. For good reason. You do not want one bank dominating the banking system. If you have one bank, it goes back to what I started with earlier, the whole question of trust. If there is one bank dominating, and especially a bank where there is a lot of political interference, you're going to have a problem, because very soon this bank is going to be making decisions not based on sound economics or sound business practices, but they're going to be making decisions based on politics. And then you're going to have a problem. This bank has a great potential to fail in those circumstances. So I think in the ECCB's wisdom, and I know because I trained the central bankers in the Caribbean, in Asia, all over the place, that's one of the things that you look for. You want to see how these banks will behave given a particular position within the whole banking structure. So it was a wise thing to do. It was a prudent decision not to allow the National Bank to go through with that decision to purchase First Caribbean Bank. As Ron said, allow another bank to come in, allow another independent bank to come in so that you can have competition. After all, we talk about a free market. The beauty of a free market is that it allows competition. As soon as you begin to constrain competition, as soon as you begin to give one bank the upper hand over the other, then you have problems. It no longer becomes a question of business or economics, it becomes a question of politics. And I'm very happy that that decision was made. And finally, just to say, it was a pleasure to be here tonight. And there is so much more we could talk about. But to be honest with you, Simon, I'm concerned about the state of the banking or the state of our banking in Dominica. I did not get a chance to go into the whole question of non-performing loans that we started talking about, but we never really delved more deeply into it. But I'm strictly concerned, and the reason why I'm concerned about, you've got to love Dominica, the constant backing of the dogs and so.
It's all a part of who we are.
Simone,
It is so. It is, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So it is part of what we, you know, we actually do. So I think it's very important, and my concern, I believe, is genuine. That the whole question of whether or not this whole desire, in particular of the U.S. authorities, to control money laundering, to control support for terrorism, all of those issues, whether or not it will ultimately lead to the demise of the banking sector as we know it. And as I said, the risk that we face is if we lose this corresponding banking, this correspondent banks situation, if we lose that battle, then the ability for us to transfer, and there was a question earlier about why we don't have Zelle. Zelle and Cash App, these are purely, strictly
Oh my, I think we lost Thomson for a minute. Hopefully he'll come back. But Mr. Lander, let me come over to you. Okay, I think he's back. Thomson, unmute your mic. You disconnected for a minute. Thomson, unmute your mic.
I'm not hearing you.
I wonder if he can hear us.
Yes,
Ron, you want to jump in for a minute while we're trying to get Dr. Fontaine's attention? Can you hear us, Thomson? You were muted for a minute. You got disconnected. Just say the last thing you were saying.
Well, you
mute yourself again.
No, no, sorry, I'm using my phone, and when people try to call, for some it cuts off the connection. I'm sorry about that.
Yes.
But yeah, so the point I was making is that my concern has to do with that if we lose this banking correspondent relationship, that it will have some serious impact. It will impact upon the ability of an individual being able to go to MoneyGram or to Western Union to send monies to Dominica. We do not have Zelle or Cash App or these novel transactions because these are linked intrinsically to the U.S. banking system. They've not opened it up. They've not made it easier for outside countries to be able to do it. So we are constrained with what we have, the formal banking system that we have now. And if we lose that correspondent relationship, it will have some serious impact. It would mean that, for example, Dominican families that depend upon this transfer from overseas. I was in town a couple of days ago, and the lines for Western Union stretches across the block.
Oh, yeah.
All right, constantly.
Oh, yeah.
That will disappear. Okay, so it means that a lot of households that depend upon this will have to go back to the days where people used to put money in the envelopes. I mean, you know what happened to those envelopes sometimes when they got to Dominica? They were stolen sometimes, you know. So we can't go back to that period. So yeah, so these are certain.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lander. Let me come over to you. And before I do, we have just one more question and one more comment. If you would like to take a stab at it, we have Marshall Lawrence, and he says, "I'm not a savvy financial matters, but here is my question: what would happen if Dominica implemented its own currency? Would there be much restrictions?" And then Augustina says, "Amazing panel. Thank you for a great program. Have a good night." Thank you, Augustina. So you want to just take a stab at that question as we wind down for this evening, and any of your final thoughts you want to share with us this evening, Mr. Lander?
Yes, I think the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank with our currency is the way we continue to go.
Right.
It has been very stable. We've got to ensure that we have the people in there to manage the currency, to manage the systems, and to keep it that way. If Dominica goes its own way, it's going to be trouble.
Absolutely.
Serious trouble. Two other areas I just want to speak on very briefly before we close up is the CBI. When I completed my master's degree, Mr. Julius Timothy gave me an assignment to review the CBI project. During that time, Greystone was enjoying the CBI project. You never knew what commission she was making. And the resource from the CBI, she was using it ostensibly to build a hotel. But Mr. Timothy was not happy with that, and he wanted to open it out a bit. And I came forward and I did a document which we call the Re-Injured Economic Citizenship Program. And one of the persons who benefited most from that was Mr. Sam Raphael. Mr. Sam Raphael is one of the persons who have been able to successfully use the CBI funds. And we need other persons to use it in that way. The other point I want to make in closing is that in terms of the FATF recommendations, we've made some significant progress progress in satisfying the key and core recommendations. In a CFATF plenary in November 2014, El Salvador, that was recognized. But what needs to be done is that we need to invest in our persons, in our capacities, in the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the Financial Services Unit, because this is going to be a major challenge for us in moving forward. How we address the Financial Action Task Force recommendations. That's it from me tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Miss Mathieu, please tell your mother good night for me.
I will. She was on the live. Say hi to your family. Yes.
Yeah. I'll say hello to my mother for you.
Yes, thanks.
Well, Simone, I just want to thank you for having me here tonight as well.
Yes.
It's a beautiful program. One of the things we didn't talk about is the politically exposed officers and directors of banks has become a major concern to the international organizations. Too many people politically exposed are sitting on boards and holding key positions in those financial activities. And that's a concern. Yeah,
excellent. Yes, yeah. Mr. Robinson, you have any final thoughts for us?
Yes. First of all, Simone, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Dr. Fontaine and my friend Corbett for being on this panel. But I want to touch on something that Corbett just said in closing. This issue of that is one of the major issues that is from that apart from the idea of money laundering in through the housing projects and so. The politically exposed persons, people don't understand. I spoke to somebody in one of the financial institutions about this stuff, and the person, somebody who is a politically exposed, being the chairman of the board. And I pointed out to them, this is a very dangerous move, because if the correspondent bank is aware of that, that's it. They won't have correspondent bank, because that bank in the United States will be penalized. For example, the transactions they do with National probably cost them $100,000 a year. When they find out that this thing is going on, they may be fined millions.
Right.
Why would I risk paying millions of dollars in fine? I only get $100,000. This is part of that. This is part of the problem, because we will not adhere to the standards required. And then we're talking about the global financial market and the global this. We cannot be in a global environment and want to act like village people. Anyway, thank you for having me, and I want to thank all the listeners. And I'm glad for the opportunity.
Yes, Mr. Robinson, and thank you, and Dr. Fontaine, Mr. Corbett, Mr. Lander, for all your wonderful contribution. Hermelina Watson Juveni, Auntie Hummy says, say hi to your mom, Mr. Lander. Carl Kobe.
Yes.
Great.
We'll do that.
Yes, great discussion, guys. Victorious. Yep, PEP is the problem. Beverly Johnson, great to see you out there in California. Hi, Dr. Simone and guests. Awesome program. Have a blessed night. Marshall, thank you for the reply, sir. Thanks, Dr. Simone. Good evening, everyone. Irvin Hamilton, I think there should be a part 2 of the program. Thank you. So maybe we can get everyone back on for a part 2 of the program. So again, thank you for joining us for another episode of Roots Connections on Q, right here on Q95, the big station, as we discuss our concerns and our questions with regards to the international banks leaving Dominica and the Caribbean, and the implication for us as individuals as well as for our businesses. So as our time together comes to an end, we want to say a special thank you to the panel, to our radio listeners, our Facebook Live and YouTube Live audience for being here and for your incredible contributions to the conversation. We want to say good evening to Mr. G, the Q95 family, DJ Shan, who was on the console, as well as Mr. Sherwin Norris for keeping us connected. So as the world continues to change, continues to evolve, we will continue to explore these changes right here on Roots Connections. We will continue to tap into our experts, our human resources, and make every effort to reverse that brain drain, the opportunities where all our experts are now off the island. With technology, now we have the ability to bring our experts back as we make contributions to conversations of national importance. So we will continue to explore concrete and practical economic opportunities for financial independence and how we can provide hope and aspiration for our young people, especially for our young people who are looking for guidance, who are looking for inspiration as they as well chart their own path in this world. So again, I want to thank you for being here. Don't forget, mark your calendar. We will be back August 24th for another engaging conversation and another important topic of relevance to the development of Dominica. So don't forget, keep it locked to Q95 FM for the best in programming and to visit Q95DA.com for past episodes as well as live programming. Remember to follow Q95 FM Radio and Push Past 10 on Facebook. And for more information of how we continue to build our international village, our global community of Dominicans who are ready to work beyond our borders, ready to come together for the development of our country, you can visit my page at pushpast10.com. Again, that is pushpast10.com. So again, I want to say good evening. Thank you for being here. The panel, you can unmute your mics as we say good evening to everyone and farewell. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being here, everyone. Let's see, final comments. Claralyn Warrington, thank you all. May God bless you. And Didier, as a banker, I can relate. Was a great show. Petter Sweeney, Ronald, great and current information. Wonderful program. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Have yourself a wonderful evening, a great night, and hopefully we'll do it again another time.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simone, and hopefully with other backing dogs next time.
Yeah, that's okay. Add it to the ambience.
Good night, everybody. I enjoy the mental intercourse.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Simone. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thomson.
Yes. Thank you, guys. All right. Have a good night.
Landa, give me a call sometime, now.
Okay, Louis. Okay, Louis. I'll do that.
If you're in the area, we're signing up DJ Sean.
You can get my number from Loftus or Max or anyone else.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Right. Good night.
The best athlete on literally every team I played on, for every sport I played.
Brianna had this passion since she was a young girl and watched the 1980 Olympic Games.
And my mom and dad, to their wisdom, I guess you could say, they didn't poo-poo it. They supported me.